Hello everyone, this is Take from bigheadtaco.com and welcome to BH2 Studios. I'm here to do my first impressions of the brand new Fujifilm GFX 100. Billy was in town just for like 2 days and he let me borrow a copy, so thank you Billy, as well as Gord, the local Fuji guy here in Vancouver, over the weekend. So I've had it for 3 days, had an opportunity to have a few days to shoot with it, so this is just my quick first impressions, and so let's start it now. A lot of other websites, you can go and look at all the major specs, but we know this is approximately a 100 megapixel, or to be precise, 102 megapixel CMOS backside illuminated sensor, manufactured by Sony to Fujifilm specs. And so 102 megapixel works out to 11,648 by 8,736 pixels at a 4:3 aspect ratio on basically a 44 millimeter by 33 millimeter with, I think it's a 55 millimeter diagonal distance, but it's a 4:3 aspect ratio. But there's so much megapixels in this sensor that a lot of you guys know I like shooting at 16:9 aspect ratio. So if you crop this image to 16:9, it still works out to be a 76 megapixel image. Works out to 11,648 on the horizontal by 6,552 pixels on the vertical. And if you crop it to the Fujifilm TX1, TX2, and the Hasselblad X-Pan, which Fujifilm made back in the 90s, early 2000s, it was the 35mm camera, but it was a 24 millimeter by 65, so almost double 35 millimeter size. So that crop is in here as an homage to the TX1, TX2 cameras. That works out to 11,648 on the horizontal by 4,304 pixels on the vertical for the 65:24 aspect ratio, and that still works out to be a 50 megapixel image, even with that much cropping. So this has a lot of potential for those that like to work in various aspect ratios, and that was kind of the beauty even in the film days. If you had like a Hasselblad 500 series square medium format, that if you shot for magazines or any kind of a layout spread, that you can crop later in post. If it ends up being a double page spread, you crop it to a landscape. If it makes it like as a cover photo, then it gets cropped vertically, and you just make sure there's lots of negative space. Your photographs are being used commercially and you don't know exactly how it's going to be cropped. There's so much room with this large sensor. That is one way that you can shoot with this. But it's not just the straight megapixels. You also have that brand new X processor 4 that's on the X-T3 and the X-T30, and we know that this will make its way all through the other Fujifilm X series cameras as well as the GFX. So the GFX 50S and the 50R had the previous processor, and they're the Type 3 Pro processor. This has the Type 4, so the latest one. So everything from when you have the EVF and you're using your thumb to move the focus point, super fast. It's not like the XH1 or the XT2. It's like the XT3 and the XT30. It's just blazing fast. And a lot of the improvements, especially in video on this, is due to that processor. So just because you have a big sensor doesn't mean that all of a sudden that you can shoot video at H.265 4K 30. No, you need a processor that can handle that type of throughput. I'm not going to talk a lot about video on this because I'm at this time not interested in shooting video. It does do up to 400 megabits per second, same as the XT3 and the XT30. It has, there's obviously with a smaller sensor, you could do more like 4K 60. You can't do that with this yet, but I don't see a need to shoot with this for video for now until they can come up with either faster lenses or but if you're a hybrid shooter and you're a commercial photographer, and I met a few that they love the ability to, 4K 30 is good enough for them, and there's a lot of punch-in. You can do that with 4K. But I think 4K, even with Micro Four Thirds, like the GH5, people still love it, and that's even a smaller sensor than the APS-C on the X-T3, and that's still decent for video, except for maybe high ISO, and that's probably where you're going to get the advantage shooting video with this, but it's not a big deal for me. I think most people that are buying this are not buying it for video. In terms of file size, you can shoot up to a 16-bit RAW file, and I looked at the files. Get this, uncompressed RAW is over 200 megabytes per file, and it averages out to about a 50 megabyte JPEG, which is a lot more reasonable. And you also can use the compressed. They say lossless, but there's always something lost. I think that's like just over 100 megabyte per file. So on the 64 gigabyte card that I have in here, it's almost full, and I got about 630 images, and that's shooting RAW plus JPEG. And so that works out to be about 300 images, but RAW plus JPEG. So that fills up really fast. So I think if you have a camera like this with a 100 megapixel, 64 gigabyte card is the minimum you should have, and probably 128 is probably the way to go. Now, in terms of size and weight, it is true that this is about the size of a top-end pro DSLR from Nikon or Canon, even back in the film days from Minolta. Like the Maxim 9 is probably about this size, but Nikon F5 from the film days, all the Canon EOS ones with the built-in grip, they're all about this size. In terms of weight, it is 1,400 grams, which includes the included EVF, 2 batteries, and a single memory card. And if you add a monster, the GF 32 to 64, which is a great focal length, it's about a 24 to 50, and it's an f4 constant. This would have been considered like a press photographer lens back in the film days. This lens here is 875 grams, so body and lens together is almost 5 pounds, or 2,275 grams. And in comparison, I'm shooting this video with the XH1. XH1 is 673 grams, so it's less than half the weight of just the body of this. And the X100F is 469 grams, and that includes the lens. This is quite heavy, and shooting with it all day, even what happens actually for me, I found, is that the inside of my thumb here started getting sore, and so you really need a nice strap. I had a lot of my cool hipster straps, I love them, on lighter bodies, because I shoot with Leicas and Fujifilms most of the time, Leica M bodies, and so I had to use this 4V design, I think that's what it's called, 4V. This is an Italian brand, and they sent me out straps a while ago, and I didn't really appreciate them in the sense that they were a little bit thicker. You can see this is kind of a thick top here. It's nice padded, cushiony leather on the inside, sort of a nice denim on the outside, and they do have the ring style here, and it's adjustable straps on the length here. So this one here feels really comfortable. So if you do buy this, I would say you probably need to upgrade not only your strap, but as well as your ring. If you have sort of the cheaper rings for lighter mirrorless cameras, you might need to upgrade these rings. But this is a heavy camera as well. It doesn't really lay flat well this way like this because the EVF sticks out so far back. And in my bag, I find that often the eye cup comes off. And when you have a bigger lens as well, it doesn't stand up. So with this 63 lens, it will stand all right up like this. But with the 32 to 64, it just kind of tilts forward. So it's better to put the camera down, sort of face down, or I always feel like I want to take the lens off. So even upgrading your camera bags, this does not fit very well in any of the camera bags that I have, because again, I'm shooting with mirrorless and Leica M bodies that tend to be thinner and easier to get in and out. If you shoot with larger DSLRs and you have like the bigger low pro bags, perhaps this should be able to just kind of slip in really nice. But if you're shooting with film mirrorless kind of bags, you need to upgrade your bags, which is either a plus or a minus, because if you love bags, then you get to buy a new one after you spend your 10,000 US or about 14,000 Canadian for just the body of the GFX 100. Now the changes from the GFX 50S, which to me is the camera that I'm gonna compare this to as a standard, because the R is kind of a little bit of a different beast, and we'll talk about that maybe in another video. But one of the biggest complaints with the 50S was that the battery was kind of in behind here, which kept it sort of not as tall, but it moved this all back. And so they moved the battery to the bottom, which is actually what I asked for when the 50S first came out, to make it thinner. But you know, now the battery's on the bottom, you get two of them, and you always have two in the body, which also kind of adds to the weight, but it's good. I think it's good to have two batteries. I shot with it all afternoon, and just one battery was used up. And so definitely all day with two batteries. One of these batteries, these medium format batteries, is equivalent to 1.5 of the X series battery. So this is basically like shooting with 3 batteries from the X series. And so battery lasts nice and long. I appreciated that. The rubber grip, the 50S, the XH1, the XT2, XT3 all have that sort of that leather-like grip with a little bit of a, I don't know, like a grain on there. This is a totally different type of rubber, and even Billy was kind of like, oh yeah, I like that's the first thing I noticed when I grabbed it. Even in pictures, this is a much smoother, it feels more high-tech, kind of it's not even, you can't even call it leather-like. It doesn't feel like leather. It feels grippier, in fact. And so I actually do like this new, more rubber-like grip than a leather-like grip. Improved sub monitor on the top, it's much larger, and because of the larger size, the 50S still had the shutter speed dial. No shutter speed dial in here. There's ways of customizing the front and rear dials to access it. No ISO dial on this side. We'll talk about that in a second. And there is a lower sub monitor, which I really like. So that instead of having the information on screen, you can get rid of it off on the screen, move it down here. My favorite is when it shows shutter speed, aperture, ISO, that kind of stuff. I like to see that down at the bottom here, and then clear my screen. And you can work this rear sub monitor with the top monitor, and you have like the histogram here, or you can have a histogram down here, or vice versa. So you can really customize these two. And this is like that electronic ink. So even when it's turned off, you could still have information up here. The only comment, the thing I can say to Fujifilm is, back here in play mode, I wish they would actually also let you see what your settings were, and if you can quickly, instead of having to go into the menus and scroll through the 4 different sub menus you get down here, I wish there was a button you could just quickly, just like how you can with the display button here, you can scroll through the different displays. I wish there was a button here you could scroll through. It'd be a good idea. And that's kind of the change here, and I really like it because I think they could add this little sub rear monitor even on the upcoming XH2 or the upcoming XT3S or the XT4, that built into the grip when you buy it is a sub monitor. I think that's a great added value, and this is a good idea from Fujifilm. Not a fan of this new drive dial here. I wish it was ISO with drive on the bottom like the XH1 and the XT3, XT2. Basically you have the 3 modes of movie, multi, and still, and then you have this drive button. I mean, if you think about it, the autofocus dial back here with single continuous manual, that's also 3 features. You could actually have that over here as a tiny submodel. I don't think they needed to give up this much real estate, because I think a lot of people, when they're shooting in still mode, they're pretty much going to stay in still mode. And so I think it's a waste of real estate. Fujifilm, I think maybe on the next model, bring back the ISO dial and bring back the drive, the lower drive dial down below. I think it'll be a more functional use. The vertical grip actually is not as, although it's built in, which is nice, right? Because you get the double batteries, you get the sub monitor, but the vertical grip, the 50S actually was more ergonomic in that the shutter button was actually in line down here with where your finger is here. So where your eye is, where the level of your eye and the level of the shutter button, when you went this way, it was also reasonably in the same position, where when you shoot vertical, see how high my hand is up here? I kind of naturally want to put my hand down here like this, And so it's not a bad vertical release. It has the lock on here, and it has the joystick down here as well that duplicates it. So you can duplicate a lot of the buttons, the Q button, the custom function buttons here, and you can also program these extra 2 buttons down the bottom. But I still feel that the 50S is nicer down here, and I'm not sure if Fujifilm can actually drop this lower. Maybe they just can't. And as well, the doors here, it has the kind of a rubbery, floppy doors here instead of a more rigid door. I actually like the XT3 where you can actually just remove the door. And I think the reason why they did this is because maybe people were breaking the doors off of the previous cameras. And so having it kind of rubbery like this, it doesn't feel as like it's as weather sealed. And I mean, it is weather sealed. It just doesn't feel like it is. And so see how that kind of has that rubbery kind of a rubber band kind of a thing in here, but you do have USB Type-C, micro HDMI, and you have your DC power in, you have your headphone input and microphone input on here, you have your dual card slot and your remote control button, which I don't think anyone uses. You could just use the app, which I hope they can improve the app. And so, what do I think of this camera? I think it's insane. It is more camera than I personally need. Me walking around, like this is with the 63, so it's like a 50mm lens. Walking around with this, it just feels so big. Even though it's faster, the autofocus is faster, everything is faster because of the processor and this new sensor, phase detect, sensor based with it's a hybrid, contrast and phase detect. Because the sensor is so big, I mean the flash sync is 1/125th of a second, which shows you that there's so much shutter that as the shutter blades move out of the way, even though like say a shutter speed is 1/1000th of a second, right? The actual exposure of what the sensor is exposed to is 1/1000th like any other camera, but it takes a lot longer for the shutter to open up, expose for 1/1000, and then the time it takes to close, that takes longer than, let's say, something on the APS-C, even though the actual exposure is the same. And so when you shoot, you can actually hear it kind of, you can sort of hear it. It's definitely, it's not slow, it's just slower from shot to shot. So if someone's kind of walking across, I don't shoot in continuous, but I leave it in single, so I just want to go like shoot across like that. It just takes a little bit more time because the sensor is so big. So there's definitely advantages of having a larger sensor, but there's also some disadvantages and advantages of shooting with the X series. So I think for specific things like sports, wildlife, if you need to shoot continuous street photography, if you're more slow and thoughtful and more of a landscape street style, then what you'll be rewarded with the resolution is just amazing. But I think for the average person, for me even when I'm shooting street, I think I'm more comfortable shooting with the XH1 or XT3, XT2 type camera, or an X Pro, if the X Pro 3 is going to come out soon. I don't know, I have no idea, but we're all waiting. So that is my first impressions of the GFX 100. Thank you again, Fujifilm Canada, for loaning this to me. I had a lot of fun, and I will get it back again because I do want to play with this. I didn't get a chance to shoot that much. I do want to shoot a little bit more nature, outdoorsy. As well, I want the GF23 lens because I like to shoot ultra wide. And I think that's really where you get the advantage of a medium format, is not necessarily telephoto, because you can always get more telephoto lenses with tele adapters and be able to have a further telephoto reach. But in terms of going this way, having 100 megapixel and being able to go an 18mm equivalent in full frame, why this way? The kind of resolution you're getting, or if you do panorama sweep, or you're gonna sort of stitch two panoramic images together, do a great kind of a cityscape, landscape image, or even doing time-lapse. Imagine being able to do time-lapse videos with this much megapixels, and then again you have so much room to crop in, to punch in, and to be able to do that kind of stuff. That's sort of the advantage of having 100 megapixel images, 200 megabyte raw files, guys. That is crazy. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to leave questions below, but I don't have a lot of information, a lot of shooting experience. Go check out Ken, the angry photographer, go check out his. I'll leave a link down below to one of his videos. He had it for, I think, for 3 weeks, and he has one on order now. So he probably currently on YouTube. He has probably the most experience of anyone shooting with the GFX 100. So he's the kind of guy to ask deep questions. But I will review this again, and did have a great time. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy shooting. Peace.